Number 5. Renee Sweeney. On January 27, 1998, 23-year-old university student Renee Sweeney was working the day shift at the adults-only video store in Sudbury, Ontario. At 11:27 a.m., a young, white man who was wearing glasses and had short blonde hair walked into the store. He pulled out a knife and started to stab Sweeney in front of the store's counter. He then went to the washroom, probably to wash off Sweeney's blood. He came back out and found that Sweeney had crawled behind the counter where there was a phone. Determined to kill her, the man walked behind the counter and continued to stab her. Just after 11:30, two of Sweeney's friends came into the store. The killer pushed past them and walked out the door. Sweeney's friends found her body and called 911. Sweeney had been stabbed over 30 times and she died as a result of her wounds. $200 was also taken from the register. When the police investigated the murder, they surmised that Sweeney may have been stalked before she was killed. In the days leading up to the murder, Sweeney had gotten a lot of phone calls that were hang-ups. Also, when she went to work, she used to park in the spot furthest from the store. However, in the days leading up to the murder, she parked as close to the store as she could. Her co-workers thought that this was very out of character for her. In one sense, the police were lucky because they were able to collect a lot of evidence from the murder scene. Besides the eyewitnesses who saw the killer and gave a description that resulted in this sketch, the killer also left behind fingerprints. Another set of clues was found a short distance away from the store. As he fled the scene, the killer discarded the jacket and a pair of white gardening gloves that he wore during the murder. The jacket is rather unique. It is a High Sierra windbreaker and it was only sold by Mervyn's department stores in California between 1994 and 1995. In the left breast pocket of the jacket, there was a diaper pin. Finally, the police had the killer's DNA, which was taken from tissue that was found under Sweeney's fingernails. From the DNA, the police were able to develop this snapshot of the killer. This is what the killer would have looked like in 1998 when he was about 25 years old. One thing that the police noticed was how similar the sketch composed from the DNA profile looks compared to the sketch that was based on the eyewitnesses' descriptions. Despite all the evidence that they have, the police have not named a suspect, and the case is currently cold. Number 4. Cynthia Anderson. Starting in summer 1981, 20-year-old Cynthia Anderson started to get unsettling phone calls at her workplace, which was a law office in Toledo, Ohio. Anderson was so worried about the calls that her employers had an emergency buzzer installed at her desk. She also kept the doors to the office locked at all times. Anderson was also apparently plagued by horrible nightmares where she was being attacked by a mysterious man. On the morning of August 4th, 1981, Anderson was working alone in the office. Witnesses last saw Anderson around 9:45 a.m., but when people called the office at 10 a.m., there was no answer. When the lawyers arrived in the office after being in court in the morning, they found that the office was ready for the day, but Anderson was gone. Her car was in the parking lot, but her purse and keys were gone. She also didn't leave a note saying where she went, which is something she always did. Finally, there was a book open on her desk. It was open to a page where the main character is being violently kidnapped. The police do not think that Anderson chose to disappear. She had no personal problems and she was looking forward to attending Bible college in the fall. Also, she left behind a large amount of money in her bank account and her social security number has not been used since she went missing. There are several suspects in the case, including a set of serial killer brothers named Anthony and Nathaniel Cook. They were convicted of murdering 9 people in Ohio, but they have denied killing Anderson. Another theory is that a drug dealer and his attorney are responsible for her disappearance. The attorney worked at the same law firm where Anderson worked in 1981, and the theory is that Anderson overheard something that she shouldn't have heard. However, there is not much evidence to back up either theory, and no one has ever been charged in connection with Anderson's disappearance. Sadly, her body has never been found. Number 3. Mary Shotwell Little. In October 1965, 25-year-old Mary Shotwell Little was working at the C&S Bank in Atlanta, Georgia. On October 14th, she left work for the day and went and picked up some groceries for a party that she planned to throw the next day. Her husband of 6 weeks, Roy Little, had been away on a business trip, and she wanted to throw him a welcome home party. After getting the groceries, she put them in her car, and then she met a co-worker for dinner at a restaurant in the Lenox Square Shopping Center. At about 8 p.m., Mary and her co-worker parted ways. The next morning, Mary didn't show up for work and she didn't call in. Mary's boss asked the co-worker who dined with her the night before if she knew Mary's whereabouts. After calling her at home and not getting an answer, they decided to phone the mall to see if Mary's car, a 1965 Mercury Comet, was still in the parking lot. The security guard checked and the car wasn't in the lot. A few hours later, Mary's boss decided to drive to the mall, and there, in plain sight, was Mary's car, parked in the exact spot that Mary had parked it the night before. The police were notified and they came to examine the car. There was a fine layer of red dust on the exterior of the car, as if it had been driven on a dirt road. Inside the car, they found the groceries that Mary had purchased in the back seat. On the console between the two seats were Mary's undergarments. They had recently been worn, and they were neatly folded. However, one stocking was missing. There was also a little bit of blood in the car, but no more than a common nosebleed. Finally, the Littles recorded their car usage in a mileage log. Using the log and the odometer, the police concluded that there were 41 miles unaccounted for. The first person of interest was Mary's husband Roy. Some of Mary's friends didn't like him, and supposedly he didn't seem to care that his wife was missing. He also refused to take a lie detector test multiple times. However, the police had no reason to suspect him. He had a solid alibi, there were no marital problems, and he had nothing to gain by killing his wife. Another suspect in the disappearance is a person who was stalking Mary before she went missing. In the weeks leading up to Mary's disappearance, she was getting strange phone calls at work. Mary told the unidentified caller that she was married and could no longer go over to the caller's house, but the caller could visit Mary at her house if he or she wanted to. Mary also received a bouquet of roses from someone who only identified themselves as a secret admirer. The police went to the flower shop, which wasn't far from Mary's house, but they couldn't identify the person who ordered the flowers. Finally, several of Mary's friends said that in the weeks before she went missing, she was afraid to be alone. She didn't like to be home alone, and she didn't like to drive alone. However, she never told anyone why she was afraid to be by herself. A month later, Mary still hadn't been found, but the police did uncover a strange clue. In the early morning hours on the day after Mary went missing, her credit card was used to buy gas at a 24-hour gas station in her hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina, which is about a 4-hour drive from Atlanta. 12 hours later, her credit card was used again to purchase gas. This time it was in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is about 2.5 hours away from Charlotte, heading away from Atlanta. The receipts were checked and both of them were signed by Mary, and it appears to be her handwriting. The police interviewed the gas station attendants at both stores. The employee in Charlotte said that he remembered the woman who signed for the gas because she had a cut on her forehead and she was trying to hide her face. She was with a man and it looked like he was giving her orders. The attendant at the Raleigh gas station said that the woman who signed the receipt had blood on her and she was with two men. Neither gas station attendant could remember what type of car she was traveling in, but there was a record of the license plate, but it turned out that the license plate was stolen off a car in Charlotte. Those were the last sightings of Mary, and her body has never been found. What the police believe happened was that Mary was grabbed by someone in the parking lot of the Lenox shopping center. The kidnapper drove Mary away in her car, and then they changed vehicles. Mary and her kidnapper then drove to Charlotte, where she was possibly held for 10 hours. While she was being held in Charlotte, an accomplice returned Mary's car to the parking lot in the Lenox shopping center, where she had parked the car the night before. Then the kidnapper and possibly his accomplice drove with Mary to Raleigh. An FBI agent who worked on the case thinks that Mary's body is buried somewhere north of Raleigh. If the theory is true, it only adds more questions instead of clearing anything up. For example, why would the kidnapper have the car returned in broad daylight to such a public place where the victim was last seen? Why would the kidnapper take Mary to her hometown where there is a better chance of her being recognized? Also, why did he make her pay for gas at the two gas stations instead of hiding her in the car? Why not pay in cash? Why start a paper trail by forcing your kidnapped victim to use her credit card? All these steps seem risky, and it would have only drawn more attention to the kidnapping. However, despite these odd steps taken by the kidnapper, or kidnappers, he or they have never been identified. One last thing to note about this case is that a co-worker of Mary's was murdered 18 months after Mary disappeared. Diane Shields was last seen leaving work in May 1967, and later that night her body was found in the trunk of her car. She suffocated to death after someone shoved a scarf down her throat. It's unclear if the two cases are connected. However, some investigators find it odd that two young women who worked at the same bank went missing and were murdered within 18 months of each other. Just like Mary's disappearance, the murder of Diane Shields is currently unsolved. Number 2. Dorothy Jane Scott. In early 1980, 32-year-old single mother Dorothy Jane Scott of Anaheim, California, was having a problem with a stalker. The man would call her at work, and she said that the voice was familiar, but she couldn't place it. Sometimes the caller would be nice, but other times he'd be violent and menacing. He also said that he was following her. To prove that he wasn't joking, he told Dorothy some personal details about herself. The calls unnerved Dorothy, and she even took self-defense classes. On the evening of May 28, 1980, Dorothy dropped off her son at her parents' house and then went to a staff meeting at her work, which was a head shop across the road from Disneyland. At the meeting, she noticed that her co-worker, Conrad Bostron, was not looking well. Specifically, his arm had become red and swollen. Dorothy drove Bostron and another co-worker, Pamela Head, to the UC Irvine Medical Center. It turned out that Bostron had been bitten by a black widow spider. When Bostron was released from the hospital, Head stayed with him while he signed some papers, and Dorothy went to bring the car up to the hospital's entrance. When Head and Bostron walked out of the hospital, they waited for a few minutes before they saw Dorothy's car speed towards them, but it didn't stop. Instead, it turned right out of the parking lot and drove off into the night. At first, Bostron and Head thought that Dorothy must have had some type of emergency with her son and had to leave, so they waited 2 hours at the hospital, and when they realized that she wasn't coming back, they called her parents, but her parents hadn't heard from her. The police were notified, and a few hours later, Dorothy's car was found engulfed in flames in an alley a few miles from the hospital. For some reason, the police did not want the Scott family to discuss the case with the media. The Scotts agreed, but about a week after Dorothy's disappearance, her mother, Vera, received a disturbing phone call. The caller asked, "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" Vera replied yes, and the caller said, "I've got her." And then he hung up the phone. 2 weeks after Dorothy went missing, her father spoke to a reporter at a local newspaper. On the day that the story appeared in the newspaper, the editor received a call from a man who said, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." The caller also described what she was wearing on the day that she went missing, and he even told the editor why Dorothy was at the hospital on the night that she disappeared. The caller continued to harass the family for the next 4 years. The calls came on Wednesdays, which was the day of the week that Dorothy disappeared. Usually they came during the day when Vera was home alone. The caller would sometimes say that he killed Dorothy, or other times he would say that he had her. Or he would call and ask, "Is Dorothy there?" The police tried to trace the calls, but the kidnapper never stayed on the line long enough. In April 1984, the caller took a break from harassing the family, but then months later, in August, a construction worker in North Anaheim was doing some digging when he came across the skeleton of a dog. Buried under the dog bones were human remains. The remains were identified a week later as Dorothy Jane Scott. Also in the grave was Dorothy's watch, which had stopped at 12:30 a.m., May 29, 1980, which is about an hour after she was last seen at the hospital. The killer may have buried Dorothy under the dog to throw off police searches. If the police used cadaver dogs and they found a dead dog, they may have just assumed that the dog smelled the remains of the dead dog and might not have dug any deeper, effectively hiding Dorothy's remains. Dorothy did not have a dog with her when she went missing, and the police have no idea where the killer got the dog from. After the body was found, the killer called the family again. When her parents were out planning her funeral, her brother got 2 calls. Both times the man asked, "Is Dorothy there?" The calls finally came to an end after that. The police are sure that the man who stalked Dorothy is responsible for her murder, and he is also the same man that harassed the family while she was missing. Unfortunately, he has never been identified. Number 1. Danny Barter. On June 18, 1959, 4-year-old Danny Barter was camping with 6 other family members on the banks of Perdido Bay, which is about an hour away from their home in Mobile. Sometime between 9:30 and 10 a.m., Danny went missing. He was barefoot and only wearing shorts. He was also drinking a knee-high soft drink. The area was searched, but Danny couldn't be found. The initial theory from the police was that Danny was attacked by an animal. The area where the family was camping had alligators and snakes nearby. 2 alligators were gutted, but their stomach didn't contain any human remains. In fact, there was no trace of the 4-year-old boy anywhere in the area. Not even his soft drink bottle was found. Since there was no trace of Danny, the family and the police concluded that he was most likely kidnapped. Quite possibly, he was kidnapped by someone who had been stalking the family for about a month. Danny's mother, Maxine Barter, first noticed a man sitting in a car watching their house about a month before the family went camping. When Maxine went to confront the man, he hid his face behind a newspaper and then drove away. A few weeks later, the neighbors spotted a man looking through a window into the bedroom where Danny and his brothers slept. The neighbors went to confront the man, but he ran away. However, he did leave behind a clue. Under the window, in the mud, was a pair of footprints. The sheriff's office was called, and castor molds of the footprints were made. Finally, the day before Danny went missing, Maxine and her sons drove to a store. Maxine left the boys in the car while she ran inside the store. When she left the car, a man pulled up beside the Barter's car, and he watched the boys for a few minutes without saying a word, and then he drove away before Maxine came back out. Sadly, it's been nearly 60 years since Danny disappeared, and he has never been found. His family is still looking for answers as to what happened to him. Thanks for watching this week's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you liked it, please subscribe. We post a new video every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Of course, we want to say a big thank you to everyone who already subscribes. If you are interested in checking out some other creepy mysteries that involve stalkers, please click on one of the videos that are on the screen now. And thanks again for watching.